The morning sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as Captain Michael "Red Falcon" Rodriguez stood at the edge of the small airfield in rural Montana. His weathered hands gripped the chain-link fence that separated him from the single runway where a modest Cessna 172 sat waiting. The irony wasn't lost on him. Just 18 months ago, he had been commanding million-dollar fighter jets, leading precision strikes, and earning medals that now gathered dust in a box somewhere in his garage. The fall from grace had been swift and brutal. A single moment of conscience during a mission over Syria had cost him everything. When ordered to engage targets in a civilian area, Michael had refused, citing potential collateral damage. His superiors called it insubordination. The media called it heroism. Michael called it the end of his military career. "You really think you can make this work?" asked Sarah Martinez, the owner of Mountain View Flight Services. She was a former Air Force pilot herself, though her career had ended differently, a medical discharge after a training accident that left her with a permanent limp. Now she ran this small flight school and charter service, barely making ends meet in the shadow of larger aviation companies. Michael turned away from the fence, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers. "I've been flying since I was 16, Sarah. Military, civilian, helicopters, jets, crop dusters. If it has wings, I can fly it. This little operation of yours has potential. You just need someone who understands both the business and the sky." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Potential doesn't pay bills, Red. I've got 3 aircraft, 2 of which need major maintenance, a handful of students who can barely afford lessons, and the bank breathing down my neck. The big charter companies in Billings and Missoula have squeezed out most of my business. I'm 3 months behind on everything." They walked toward the modest office building, a converted trailer that served as both classroom and business headquarters. Inside, aviation charts covered the walls alongside faded photographs of aircraft and pilots from decades past. A coffee maker gurgled in the corner, filling the air with the aroma that had fueled countless early morning flights. "Tell me about your routes," Michael said, settling into a chair across from Sarah's cluttered desk. "Used to run medical transports mostly. Emergency flights to bigger hospitals in Helena and Great Falls. Some scenic tours during tourist season, flight training year-round. But MedFlight took over most of the emergency contracts with their helicopters and jets. Faster, more equipment, better insurance coverage." Michael nodded, studying a map of Montana on the wall. His finger traced routes between small towns scattered across the vast landscape. "What about the towns that are too small for MedFlight? Too remote? Too poor? They drive. Sometimes 3 hours to the nearest hospital. In winter, when the passes are closed, they just hope for the best. Or they die waiting," Michael said quietly. Sarah's expression softened. "Yeah, sometimes they die waiting." They spent the next hour reviewing Sarah's books, such as they were. The numbers painted a grim picture. 3 months behind on the hangar lease, overdue maintenance on 2 aircraft, insurance premiums that consumed nearly half the monthly revenue, and a business loan that demanded payments larger than most months' income. "The Cessna 172 is solid," Sarah explained, pointing to photos of each aircraft. "Good for training and short hops. The Piper Cherokee needs engine work, probably $10,000 worth. The old Beechcraft Bonanza is my workhorse when it's running, but it's been grounded for 6 weeks with electrical problems." Michael studied the photos. "What about pilot certification? How many instructors do you have?" "Just me. Had 2 others, but they moved on when the pay got too irregular. I'm certified for single-engine, multi-engine, instrument instruction, the works. But I can only be in one place at a time. I'll get my instructor certification transferred. Shouldn't take more than a week of paperwork. I'm also certified for commercial operations, night flying, instrument approaches, all of it." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Mighty generous of you, considering I can't pay you much. Maybe not at all for the first few months. I'm not looking for charity, Sarah. I'm looking for a partnership. You need capital and expertise. I need purpose." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching. Through the window, they watched a battered pickup truck pull up to the office. A man in his 50s climbed out, moving with the careful precision of someone nursing an injury. He knocked on the door before entering. "Sarah, sorry to bother you, but I was hoping. He stopped when he saw Michael. Tom Henderson, meet Michael Rodriguez. Tom runs the medical clinic in Browning. Tom extended his hand. Dr. Henderson. And before you ask, yes, I'm the only doctor for about 60 miles in any direction. Michael shook his hand, noting the firm grip and the intelligence in the man's eyes. Pleased to meet you, doctor. Tom was just saying he wished we still did medical flights, Sarah said carefully. Dr. Henderson's face grew serious. Had a call this morning. 8-year-old girl on the Blackfeet Reservation. Severe asthma attack. Not responding to normal treatment. Family drove her 90 minutes to my clinic, but she needs a specialist and equipment I don't have. Helena's another 3 hours by road, and with the snowstorm coming in tonight. What about MedFlight? Michael asked. Call them first. They're tied up with a traffic accident in Kalispell. Multi-vehicle situation. Won't have a chopper free for at least 4 hours, maybe longer. Even then, they don't like flying into the reservation. No proper landing zones, they say. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. The girl, how critical? Sarah asked. Critical enough that waiting 4 hours might be too long. Her oxygen saturation is dropping despite treatment. She needs to be in Helena 2 hours ago. Michael stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Cessna. Weather conditions? Marginal VFR now, but deteriorating. Snow's supposed to start within 2 hours. Siding dropping fast. Sarah, is the 172 fueled and ready? Fueled, yes. But, Michael, I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I am volunteering. Doctor, can the girl travel? Any special medical equipment needed? Dr. Henderson's expression shifted from resignation to hope. She can travel if we keep her on portable oxygen. I've got everything needed for transport. But the insurance, we'll worry about insurance later, Michael said. Sarah, I assume you have the necessary permits for medical transport? Emergency authority only. And it's been months since the permits are still valid. When Sarah nodded, Michael was already moving toward the door. Doctor, get your patient ready for transport. Sarah, help me do a quick pre-flight on the 172. Within 30 minutes, they had the aircraft checked, flight plan filed, and Dr. Henderson arriving with a young patient and her mother. The girl, Maria Blackhorse, was conscious but clearly struggling to breathe despite the oxygen mask. Her mother, Elena, clutched a small bag of belongings and spoke in hushed, worried Blackfeet to her daughter. Michael helped load the stretcher into the back of the Cessna, working with Dr. Henderson to secure the oxygen tank and medical equipment. The aircraft wasn't designed for medical transport, but they made it work with straps and careful positioning. Mrs. Blackhorse, I'm going to get your daughter to the hospital as fast as safely possible, Michael said in simple, clear English. Dr. Henderson will monitor her during the flight, and will be in constant radio contact with Helena Regional Medical Center. Elena nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Thank you so much. The pre-flight check was thorough, but quick. Michael's military training showed in the efficient, methodical way he examined every system, every control surface, every instrument. Sarah watched from the ground, remembering why she had trusted him with this decision. Weather's getting worse to the south, she called up to the cockpit. Visibility down to 3 miles and dropping. Understood. We'll climb above the weather initially, then descend for approach into Helena. Flight time should be about 90 minutes. As Michael started the engine, Sarah felt a familiar mixture of anxiety and excitement. It had been too long since her aircraft had been used for something truly important. Too long since Mountain View Flight Services had made a real difference in someone's life. The Cessna lifted off into increasingly gray skies, banking south toward Helena. Michael's radio voice was calm and professional as he contacted air traffic control and reported his position, altitude, and destination. In the back, Dr. Henderson monitored Maria's vital signs while her mother held her hand and whispered encouragement. 40 minutes into the flight, the weather began to close in faster than predicted. Snow started falling, and visibility dropped to less than 2 miles. Michael contacted Helena Approach Control and requested vectors for an instrument approach. November 472, Mike Delta, Helena Approach. We show weather at minimums for ILS approach runway 21. Advise if you want to continue or divert to alternate. Michael glanced back at Dr. Henderson, who was checking Maria's oxygen saturation. The doctor shook his head slightly. Her condition was worsening. They couldn't divert to another airport that might add an hour to the flight. Helena approach. 2 Mike Delta requests vectors for ILS-21 approach. We have a medical emergency on board, critical pediatric patient. Roger, 2 Mike Delta. Turn right heading 180, descend, and maintain 6,000. Vectors to final approach course. The approach was challenging, but not beyond Michael's capabilities. Years of flying in combat conditions, approaching aircraft carriers in rough seas, and navigating through weather that would ground civilian aircraft had prepared him for moments like this. The ILS needle stayed centered as he descended through the clouds, breaking out just above minimums with the runway clearly visible ahead. The landing was smooth, and ground personnel were waiting with an ambulance. Dr. Henderson had radioed ahead with Maria's condition and vital signs, so the Helena medical team was prepared. They transferred the girl quickly and efficiently, her mother riding in the ambulance while Dr. Henderson stayed to brief the receiving physicians. That was some flying, Dr. Henderson said as they watched the ambulance disappear toward the hospital. I wasn't sure we were going to make it through that weather. All in a day's work, Michael replied, but Sarah could see the satisfaction in his eyes. This was what he had been missing, the sense of purpose that came from using his skills to save lives. They refueled the Cessna and waited for the weather to clear enough for the return flight to Mountain View. During the wait, Dr. Henderson made several phone calls, including one to his colleague at Helena Regional. Maria's stable, he reported. They've got her on a ventilator and are starting specialized treatment. She'll make a full recovery, thanks to getting her here when we did. Another 2 hours by road, and he shrugged, but the implication was clear. Doctor, Michael said during a quiet moment, how often do situations like this come up? Medical emergencies that need air transport from remote areas? Dr. Henderson considered the question. More than you might think. The reservation alone has 12,000 people spread across an area the size of Connecticut. 1 clinic, 1 doctor, me, and the nearest hospital with real emergency capabilities is 90 minutes away by road on a good day. Winter storms can make it 3 hours or more. What about other rural areas? Other small towns? Eastern Montana is full of them. Havre, Malta, Glasgow, Circle, Jordan, towns with maybe 1,000 people and 100 miles to the nearest hospital. Some places they've got volunteer EMTs and maybe a nurse practitioner, but anything serious means a long, long drive. Sarah had been listening quietly. How many medical transports do you think we could handle in a month? Realistically, Dr. Henderson pulled out his phone and scrolled through recent messages. Just in the past month, I've had 6 cases that could have used air transport. Heart attacks, strokes, severe injuries, complicated births. That's just from my clinic. Multiply that by all the rural clinics and critical access hospitals across Montana. We're talking about dozens of flights per month, Michael said slowly. Easily. And that's just medical. There are other needs too. Parts delivery to remote operations, personnel transport to oil rigs, and ranches, emergency supply runs during bad weather. They flew back to Mountain View as soon as the weather cleared, arriving just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. Sarah had been quiet during the return flight, but Michael could see her mind working. That felt good, she said as they tied down the aircraft. Saving a life tends to have that effect. No, I mean this felt like what we should be doing. Not just flight training and scenic tours, but actually making a difference. Michael nodded. Dr. Henderson said there are dozens of potential medical flights every month. That's revenue, Sarah. Real, steady revenue from people who genuinely need the service. And the insurance companies will pay for medical transport. Medicare, Medicaid, private insurance. They all cover emergency air transport when it's medically necessary. They walked back to the office as darkness settled over the airfield. Inside, Sarah pulled out a calculator and started running numbers. If we could handle 20 medical flights per month at an average of $1,500 per flight, she looked up at Michael. That's $30,000 monthly revenue. Enough to pay the bills, fix the aircraft, maybe even expand. But we need proper medical equipment. Patient stretchers, oxygen systems, monitoring equipment. And We need additional insurance coverage. How much are we talking about? Michael had done medical transport during his military service. Maybe $50,000 to properly equip one aircraft for medical transport. Another $20,000 annually for insurance. But if we're generating $30,000 per month, we break even in 2 months and profit after that. Sarah's voice was getting excited. Michael, this could actually work. This could save the business. It could do more than that. It could save lives on a regular basis. They spent the next hour sketching out a rough business plan. Convert the Beechcraft Bonanza for medical transport. It was larger and faster than the Cessna, better suited for carrying patients and medical equipment. Use the Cessna for training flights and short hops. Get the Piper Cherokee repaired and use it as backup for both medical and charter flights. We'll need startup capital, Sarah said. The aircraft modifications, equipment, insurance, marketing to medical facilities. I've got some savings, Michael offered. Military pension, some investments. Not a fortune, but enough to get started. I can't ask you to risk your money on this. You're not asking. I'm offering to invest in a partnership. Equal partners, equal risk, equal reward. Sarah studied his face in the lamplight. You're serious about this? About staying here, building something? Sarah, I spent 20 years in the military following orders, flying missions that sometimes kept me awake at night. Today, I flew one mission that reminded me why I became a pilot in the first place. To help people. To make a difference. And if it doesn't work, if we can't get enough flights, or the insurance companies don't pay, or the big medical transport companies muscle us out. Michael smiled for the first time since she'd met him. Then, we'll have tried something worthwhile. That's more than I can say about most things I've done lately. As they locked up the office and walked to their vehicles, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Real, tangible hope that Mountain View Flight Services might survive and even thrive. Michael, one more question. Why Red Falcon? The nickname, I mean. Michael paused at his truck door. Afghanistan, 2019. My squadron was providing close air support for a ground unit that was pinned down. I was flying an A-10, and my call sign that day was Red Falcon. Made some aggressive low-level runs to break up the ambush, probably saved a dozen American lives. The name stuck. And now I'm hoping Red Falcon can save some civilian lives instead. As Sarah drove home through the Montana darkness, she realized that everything had changed in a single day. This morning, she had been contemplating bankruptcy and the end of her aviation dreams. Tonight, she was planning the expansion of a business that could serve communities across the state. Meanwhile, at the Helena Regional Medical Center, 8-year-old Maria Blackhorse was breathing easier, surrounded by sophisticated medical equipment and caring nurses. Her mother sat beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand and thinking about the pilot who had flown through deteriorating weather to get them there in time. Dr. Henderson was already making phone calls to colleagues at other rural clinics, spreading the word that Mountain View Flight Services was back in the medical transport business. Within hours, the first inquiries would start coming in. And in his small apartment above the hangar, Michael Rodriguez was staring at aviation charts and planning routes to towns most people had never heard of, places where his flying skills could mean the difference between life and death. For the first time since leaving the military, he felt like he had found his mission. 3 weeks after the successful flight with Maria Blackhorse, Mountain View Flight Services was buzzing with activity unlike anything Sarah had seen in years. The phone rang constantly with inquiries from medical facilities across northern Montana, and Michael was spending 12 hours a day working on aircraft modifications and flight planning. The transformation had begun with the Beechcraft Bonanza. Michael and Sarah had driven to Spokane to purchase medical equipment from a company that specialized in air ambulance conversions. Stretcher mounts, oxygen systems, medical power outlets, and communication equipment now filled the hangar where the Bonanza waited for installation. The FAA paperwork alone is going to take 2 weeks, Sarah said, reviewing the stack of forms required for medical transport certification. Equipment inspection, pilot certification updates, insurance approval. It's like starting a new airline. Michael looked up from the oxygen system manual he was studying. Better to do it right the first time than cut corners and lose our certification later. Dr. Henderson says there are 3 more critical cases waiting for transport this week alone. The success of Maria's flight had spread through the medical community faster than either of them had anticipated. Dr. Henderson had contacted colleagues at rural clinics and critical access hospitals throughout the region, sharing details about the flight and the potential for regular medical transport services. I got a call from Dr. Sarah Runninghorse at the Indian Health Service Hospital in Browning, Sarah reported. They want to set up a regular contract for emergency transports to Great Falls and Billings. Could be 8 to 10 flights per month just from their facility. What about payment? Insurance coverage? Mixed bag. Indian Health Service covers some costs directly, Medicare and Medicaid cover others, and some patients have private insurance. But here's the thing. They're willing to guarantee payment even if insurance doesn't come through. The Tribal Council voted to allocate emergency funds for medical transport. Michael nodded approvingly. That's smart business for them, and for us. What other contracts are we looking at? Sarah pulled out a notebook filled with scrawled notes and phone numbers. Dr. Patricia Williams in Havre wants coverage for their critical access hospital. Dr. James Burke in Glasgow is interested for emergency psychiatric transports. Apparently, there's a real need to get people in mental health crisis to facilities with proper resources. And there's a veterinarian in Circle who wants to discuss transporting injured ranch animals to the University Vet School in Bozeman. Animals. Michael raised an eyebrow. Big money in prize breeding cattle and quarter horses out here. Dr. Martinez says he's had to euthanize animals that could have been saved if he could have gotten them to specialist veterinary surgeons in time. Insurance companies pay for livestock transport, just like human medical transport. The scope of potential business was becoming clearer every day. Montana's vast distances and sparse population created constant demand for air transport that larger companies either couldn't or wouldn't serve profitably. There's one more opportunity, Sarah said hesitantly. Dr. Henderson got a call from the State Emergency Management Office. They're looking for aviation contractors who can respond to natural disasters, search and rescue operations, fire suppression support, that kind of thing. State contracts could be very lucrative, Michael mused. But they'd require additional certifications, different insurance, maybe even specialized equipment. The state coordinator is coming out next week to evaluate our capabilities. Wants to see if we qualify for their emergency response contractor list. Before Michael could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of a helicopter approaching the airfield. Through the hangar doors, they watched a sleek medical helicopter settle onto the tarmac near their office. Med-flight, Sarah said grimly. Wonder what they want. 2 men in professional uniforms walked toward the hangar. The older one, wearing captain stripes, extended his hand as they approached. Captain James Morrison, Med-flight Operations. This is my partner, Captain Steve Walsh. We understand you folks have been doing some medical transport flights recently. Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. That's right. We're properly certified for emergency medical transport, Sarah replied carefully. I'm sure you are. Mind if we take a look at your operation? It wasn't really a question. Captain Morrison was already walking around the Bonanza, examining the medical equipment installation with a professional eye. His partner was taking notes and photos with his phone. Nice setup, Morrison commented. Though I notice you're still in the conversion process. FAA approval pending. We expect final certification within 2 weeks, Michael said evenly. In the meantime, we're operating under emergency authority for critical transport situations. About that, Morrison turned to face them directly. We've had some concerns raised about unlicensed operations competing for medical transport contracts. Quality control issues, insurance liability problems, patient safety concerns. Sarah felt her temper rising. Are you accusing us of operating illegally? Not at all. Just want to make sure everyone understands the complexity of medical aviation. It's not like flying tourists around for scenic views. People's lives are at stake. Michael stepped closer to Morrison. Captain, I've been flying for 25 years, including combat medical evacuations. I think I understand something about having people's lives at stake. Morrison sized up Michael, noting the confidence and military bearing. Fair enough. What's your background? 20 years Air Force. Attends F-16s, some helicopter time. Combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, including close air support and medical evacuation missions. And you? Morrison turned to Sarah. 15 years Air Force, mostly transport and training aircraft. Medical discharge after a training accident, but I maintain my commercial and instructor certifications. Morrison's attitude shifted slightly. Dealing with military pilots was different from intimidating civilian flight instructors. Look, we're not here to cause trouble. Medflight serves a big territory, and we can't be everywhere at once. But we need to make sure that when we can't respond to a call, patients are getting quality care from qualified operators. What exactly are you proposing? Sarah asked. Coordination. When we're tied up with multiple calls or weather keeps us grounded, we could refer overflow to qualified local operators. Share information about patient conditions, provide medical consultation during flights, that kind of thing. Michael recognized a business proposition when he heard one. What would you want in return? Standard referral fees for cases we direct to you. Shared training protocols to ensure consistent care quality. And agreement that you won't actively compete for our established contract routes. Which routes would those be? Sarah asked. Morrison pulled out a tablet and showed them a map of Montana with colored zones marked. Basically, anything within 100 miles of Billings, Great Falls, or Missoula. Those are our primary service areas with established contracts. Michael studied the map. The colored zones covered perhaps half the state, but left vast areas of rural Montana unserved. What about the areas you're not covering? Yours to develop, plus overflow from our zones when we're busy or grounded. Sarah looked at Michael. The proposal wasn't unreasonable, and it would provide a source of referral business while they built their own contract base. But something felt off about the timing of this visit. How did you know we were getting into medical transport? She asked. Morrison smiled thinly. Small aviation community. Word gets around when someone starts making medical flights. Or when someone starts cutting into your business, Michael said flatly. That too. But like I said, there's plenty of work to go around. Montana's a big state. After Medflight departed, Sarah and Michael spent an hour discussing the proposal. The referral arrangement could provide steady revenue while they built their business, but the territorial restrictions were concerning. Half our potential contracts are in their established service areas, Sarah pointed out. Dr. Henderson and Browning is technically within 100 miles of Great Falls. But they admitted they can't serve all those areas effectively, Michael countered. That's why they're here proposing coordination instead of just trying to shut us down. The phone rang, interrupting their discussion. Sarah answered and found herself speaking with Dr. Elena Vasquez at the Regional Medical Center in Great Falls. We have an emergency situation that requires immediate air transport, Dr. Vasquez explained. 42-year-old male, construction accident at a remote oil rig site northeast of Glasgow. Severe internal injuries, possible spleen rupture. He needs to get to Billings for surgery, but ground transport would take 4 hours minimum. Sarah looked at Michael, who was already pulling on his flight jacket. What about Medflight? Already called them. Both helicopters are committed to other emergencies. One in Kalispell, one in Missoula. They can't free up aircraft for at least 3 hours. We can be airborne in 20 minutes, Sarah said. But we'll need to use the Cessna since our Bonanza isn't certified yet. Whatever you've got. Dr. Patricia Williams in Havre is prepping the patient for transport. She'll have medical escort and portable life support equipment ready. Michael was already conducting his pre-flight inspection when Sarah hung up the phone. They had done this dance before. Rapid response to critical medical situations where every minute counted. The flight to Havre took 45 minutes through clear afternoon skies. Dr. Williams met them at the small municipal airport with an ambulance and her medical team. The patient, Randy Thompson, was conscious but clearly in severe pain despite medication. Vitals are stable for now, Dr. Williams reported as they loaded him into the Cessna, but his blood pressure is dropping. I suspect internal bleeding that's getting worse. The medical escort was a nurse practitioner named Jennifer Clark who had worked with Dr. Williams for 15 years. She efficiently managed the portable monitoring equipment while Michael prepared for takeoff. Flight time to Billings will be about 90 minutes, Michael announced. I'll request priority handling from air traffic control and vectors direct to the hospital. The flight south was smooth but tense. Jennifer monitored Randy's vital signs constantly, reporting to both Dr. Williams by radio and the trauma team waiting in Billings. His blood pressure continued to drop despite 4 fluids, confirming the suspected internal bleeding. "We need to go faster," Jennifer said quietly as they passed the halfway point. Michael was already flying at maximum cruise speed, but he understood her concern. Billings approach, November 472 Mike, Delta, requesting priority vectors and expedited approach. "We have a critical trauma patient with declining vitals." 2 Mike, Delta, Billings approach. "You're cleared direct Billings, descend, and maintain 8,000. Medical helicopter is inbound from the west. We'll sequence you ahead of them." Michael started the descent and increased power settings beyond normal cruise parameters. The Cessna's engine responded smoothly, indicating the recent maintenance was paying off. 20 minutes later, they were on final approach to Billings Logan International Airport. An ambulance waited beside the runway, along with a trauma team from Billings Clinic. The transfer was accomplished in minutes, and Randy Thompson was racing toward the hospital within 15 minutes of landing. "That was exceptional work," Jennifer said as they watched the ambulance disappear. "I've flown with MedFlight plenty of times, and that was as smooth and professional as any transport I've experienced." Dr. Williams called them 2 hours later with an update. Randy was out of surgery and expected to make a full recovery. The surgeon confirmed that another hour's delay would have been life-threatening due to internal bleeding. Flying back to Mountain View that evening, Michael and Sarah discussed the day's events. The successful flight proved they could handle critical medical transports effectively, but it also highlighted their limitations with the smaller aircraft. "We need the Bonanza certified as fast as possible," Sarah said. "The Cessna works for short flights, but we need the speed and space for longer transports." "Agreed. I'll call the FAA inspector tomorrow and see if we can expedite the final certification." "There's something else," Sarah said. "Dr. Williams wants to discuss a monthly retainer arrangement. Guaranteed payment for availability, plus per-flight fees for actual transports. That's exactly the kind of stable revenue stream we need." "How much are we talking about?" $5,000 per month retainer, plus $1,500 per flight. She estimates they'd need our services 6 to 8 times monthly. Michael did quick mental math. That's $17,000 to $22,000 monthly from one contract alone. Add any other contracts we're developing. We're looking at sustainable profitability within 60 days. They landed at Mountain View as sunset painted the western mountains in brilliant orange and red. The small airfield looked different somehow, more purposeful, more important. What had been a struggling flight training school was becoming something more significant. "Michael, there's something I need to tell you," Sarah said as they tied down the aircraft. "I got a call from my banker this afternoon. The loan payment I missed last month. They're willing to restructure the debt based on our projected medical transport revenue." "That's great news." "It gets better. They're also willing to extend additional credit for equipment purchases and aircraft modifications. Seems they think our business plan has real potential." Michael smiled. Funny how having actual revenue projections changes their attitude. "There's more. Dr. Henderson called while we were flying to have her. The Tribal Council wants to meet with us about a comprehensive medical transport contract. Not just emergency flights, but regular transport for tribal members who need specialist care in Billings or Great Falls." "How many flights per month?" He estimates 15 to 20. Mix of emergency and scheduled transports. As they walked toward the office, Michael's phone buzzed with a text message. After reading it, his expression grew serious. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "Message from Captain Morrison at MedFlight. They want to schedule a follow-up meeting tomorrow. Says they have a revised proposal that might interest us." "Think they're concerned about losing business?" Michael considered the question. "I think they're realizing that we're not going away, and we might be more competition than they initially expected." Inside the office, they found a stack of messages from the answering service. 3 more medical facilities had called about transport services, 2 aircraft part suppliers had returned calls about equipment orders, and the FAA inspector was confirming his visit for the next week. "It's really happening," Sarah said, looking at the messages. 3 weeks ago, this place was dying. Now we can barely keep up with the demand." "The market was always there," Michael observed. "We just needed to prove we could serve professionally and safely." As they reviewed the day's business, both of them felt the satisfaction that comes from building something meaningful. Every successful flight meant someone's life had been saved or improved. Every new contract meant jobs and economic stability for their small community. Michael, can I ask you something personal? Sarah said as they prepared to close up for the night. Sure. Do you ever regret leaving the military? Giving up the career you'd built? Michael was quiet for a long moment, staring at the aviation charts covering the office walls. I regret the circumstances that led to it. But coming here, building this with you, finding a way to use my skills to help civilians instead of fighting wars, no, I don't regret that. Even if we fail, even if the big companies squeeze us out or the market doesn't develop the way we hope. Sarah, 3 weeks ago, I was drinking beer for breakfast and wondering what the hell I was going to do with the rest of my life. Today, I flew a mission that saved a man's life. Tomorrow, we're meeting with tribal leaders who want our help serving their community. Failure would be giving up without trying. As they locked up and walked to their vehicles, both of them noticed the Beechcraft Bonanza sitting in the hangar, nearly ready for its medical transport certification. In a few days, it will be the most sophisticated air ambulance serving rural Montana, capable of carrying patients in comfort and safety across distances that would take hours by ground. The phone in the office started ringing as they reached their trucks. Sarah looked at Michael, who shrugged and headed back to answer it. Mountain View Flight Services, this is Sarah. Sarah, this is Dr. Rebecca Martinez in Shelby. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a situation. 26-year-old woman in premature labor. Complications that require immediate transport to Great Falls. Can you help us? Sarah looked at Michael, who was already pulling his flight jacket back on. We'll be airborne in 30 minutes. Doctor, have your patient ready for transport. As they prepared for their second emergency flight of the day, both of them realized that this was just the beginning. Word of their capabilities was spreading through Montana's medical community, and the demand for their services was growing faster than they had anticipated. The Red Falcon was no longer just a former military pilot looking for purpose. He was becoming the cornerstone of a medical transport network that could serve communities across one of America's most challenging and beautiful states. 6 weeks into their medical transport operations, Mountain View Flight Services faced its first major crisis. The call came at 3 in the morning on a bitter February night when the temperature had dropped to minus 20 degrees and snow was falling steadily across northern Montana. Sarah, this is Dr. Henderson. I need you and Michael airborne immediately. We have a school bus accident on Highway 2 near Browning. Multiple injuries, some critical. The road is blocked by the wreck and weather, and MedFlight can't get their helicopters off the ground in these conditions. Sarah was instantly alert, having learned to wake up completely at the first ring during emergency calls. How many patients were we looking at? 15 kids and the driver. Bus hit black ice and rolled into a ditch. At least 4 critical cases that need immediate transport to Great Falls or Billings. 2 have suspected head injuries. 1 has a crushed pelvis, and 1 appears to have internal bleeding. Michael was already awake and getting dressed. Military training had taught him to function effectively with minimal sleep and maximum stress. Weather conditions at the airport, he called to Sarah. Dr. Henderson, what's the visibility and ceiling at our field? I'm looking at the weather report now. Ceiling is about 600 feet, visibility 3 miles, and snow. Winds are calm. It's marginal, but flyable for an experienced pilot. Michael took the phone. Doctor, this is Michael. We have 2 aircraft available, the Cessna and our newly certified Bonanza. The Bonanza can carry 2 patients plus medical escorts, but we'll need multiple flights to handle 4 critical cases. How long between flights? 90 minutes round trip to Great Falls, assuming we can maintain approach minimums. If weather deteriorates further, we might have to divert to alternate airports. Dr. Henderson was quiet for a moment, calculating time against medical needs. The 2 head injury cases can't wait. They need neurosurgery within 2 hours or we'll lose them. The other 2 are critical but stable for now. We'll take the head injuries first. Have your medical team ready to load patients as soon as we land at the accident scene. Michael, there's no airport near the accident. You'll have to land on Highway 2. The State Patrol is clearing a section of road about a mile from the crash site. Landing on a highway in snow and darkness was challenging, but not impossible. Michael had done similar operations during military service, though usually in better weather conditions. Sarah, get the Bonanza pre-flight and ready for medical configuration. I'll file emergency flight plans for multiple trips to Great Falls. Within 40 minutes, they were airborne into the snowy darkness. The Bonanza climbed smoothly through the low clouds, emerging into clear air at 8,000 feet, where stars were visible above a solid layer of white cloud deck. Beautiful night once you get above the weather, Michael commented to Sarah, who was serving as co-pilot and medical coordinator. Let's hope it stays this way for the next few hours. We got a lot of flying ahead of us. The GPS showed their position relative to Highway 2, and Michael began descent through the clouds toward the reported landing zone. Breaking out at about 700 feet, they could see flashing lights from emergency vehicles scattered along the highway. There's our landing zone. Sarah pointed to a straight section of highway where road flares marked the edges of a makeshift runway. State patrol cars blocked traffic in both directions, creating a safe approach corridor. Michael set up for a straight-in approach, using the highway centerline as his runway. The Bonanza's landing lights illuminated falling snow and the dark pavement ahead. Touchdown was smooth, and they rolled to a stop near the accident scene. The school bus was on its side in the ditch, emergency lights from ambulances and fire trucks casting eerie shadows in the falling snow. Paramedics and volunteer firefighters were carefully extracting injured students from the wreckage while Dr. Henderson coordinated medical triage. First two patients are ready, Dr. Henderson called as Michael and Sarah approached. 14-year-old male with suspected skull fracture and brain swelling. 16-year-old female with severe head trauma and declining consciousness. Both need neurosurgery immediately. The patients were loaded quickly but carefully into the Bonanza's medical compartment. Dr. Henderson climbed aboard as medical escort, along with a nurse from the Browning Hospital who would assist during transport. Great Falls Regional is expecting us, Dr. Henderson reported as they prepared for takeoff. Neurosurgery team is being called in or is being prepped. The takeoff from Highway 2 was more challenging than landing. Michael used every available foot of pavement, rotating at the last possible moment to clear power lines at the end of the cleared section. Once airborne, he climbed quickly back through the clouds toward Great Falls. During the 45-minute flight, Dr. Henderson and the nurse worked constantly to stabilize their patients. The boy's intracranial pressure was increasing despite medication, while the girl's neurological responses were becoming more sluggish. "We need to get there faster," Dr. Henderson said quietly as they approached Great Falls airspace. Michael was already requesting priority handling from air traffic control. Great Falls approach, November 7-8 Niner Golf Mike. Emergency medical flight with 2 critical head trauma patients. Requesting vectors direct to the hospital and emergency landing clearance. Roger, 9 Golf Mike. You're cleared direct Great Falls Regional, runway 30, winds calm, visibility 4 miles in snow. Medical helicopter pad is on the east side of the hospital complex. Actually, we'll need the main runway. We're flying a fixed-wing aircraft. Copy that. Ground vehicles will meet you at the runway for patient transfer. The approach and landing were routine despite the weather, and the trauma team was waiting with ambulances as they taxied to the terminal. Both patients were transferred quickly to the hospital, where neurosurgeons were already scrubbed and ready for emergency surgery. Excellent work, the emergency room physician told Michael and Sarah as they prepared to return for the second load. Getting them here, this quickly gives them both a fighting chance. The flight back to the accident scene took another 45 minutes. By now, the remaining 2 critical patients were prepared for transport. A 17-year-old boy with a crushed pelvis that required orthopedic surgery, and a 15-year-old girl with internal bleeding that needed immediate surgical intervention. This second flight proceeded smoothly, with both patients stable enough to tolerate the transport well. The orthopedic and trauma surgeons at Billings Clinic were ready when they arrived, and both patients were rushed into surgery within minutes of landing. That's 4 lives that probably wouldn't have made it by ground transport, the Billings trauma physician told them. Excellent flying in difficult conditions. But their work wasn't finished. Dr. Henderson called as they were refueling for the return flight to Mountain View. "We have 3 more students with significant, but not immediately life-threatening injuries. broken bones, possible internal injuries that need evaluation, concussion protocols that require monitoring. Can you make one more trip? Michael checked his watch. They had been flying for 5 hours in challenging conditions, making multiple landings on a snow-covered highway and navigating through weather that had grounded other aircraft. Fatigue was setting in, but these were still children who needed medical care. One more trip, he confirmed. But this will have to be our last for the night. We're approaching crew rest limits. The third flight transported the remaining injured students to appropriate medical facilities based on their specific needs. 2 went to Great Falls for orthopedic evaluation, while 1 was taken to Billings for monitoring of a potential concussion. By sunrise, all 16 bus accident victims had been transported to appropriate medical facilities. The most critically injured were out of surgery and stable. The less severely injured were being treated and would make full recoveries. Most importantly, no lives have been lost. Mountain View Flight Services handled 15 medical transport flights in 8 hours, Dr. Henderson reported to the State Emergency Management Office the next morning. In weather conditions that grounded all other aircraft in the region, their response probably saved at least 4 lives and definitely prevented long-term disabilities for several others. The story of the school bus rescue spread quickly through Montana's medical and aviation communities. Local television stations covered the story, and newspapers across the state featured articles about the small flight service that had stepped up when larger companies couldn't respond. We've had 43 calls for new service contracts since the bus accident story broke, Sarah reported during their weekly business meeting. Rural hospitals from Havre to Miles City want to discuss medical transport agreements. Michael studied the map of Montana on their office wall, now covered with pins marking existing and potential service locations. We can't handle that volume with 2 aircraft and 2 pilots. We need to expand. I've been thinking about that, Sarah said. We need at least 1 more aircraft configured for medical transport, and we need additional pilots certified for medical flying. Any thoughts on where to find qualified pilots? Actually, yes. I got a call yesterday from Captain Lisa Chun. She's retiring from the Air Force next month, 20-year career flying C-130s and medical evacuation flights. Heard about our operation and wants to know if we're hiring. Michael's face lit up. Military medical evacuation experience? That's exactly what we need. There's more. She knows 2 other pilots who are transitioning out of military service. All 3 have medical transport experience and want to stay in aviation without joining the airlines. What about aircraft? We need at least 2 more planes to handle the demand we're seeing. Sarah pulled out a folder of aircraft listings. I found a used King Air 200 that's been configured for medical transport. Previous owner with a hospital in North Dakota that upgraded to jets. Asking price is reasonable, and it would give us pressurized cabin, faster cruise speed, and capacity for 4 patients plus medical escorts. That's a significant investment. Are we ready for that kind of expansion? Our revenue last month was $87,000. Net profit after all expenses was $34,000. If we maintain that growth rate, we can finance additional aircraft and still show healthy profits. The business growth was almost overwhelming, but it represented real needs being met across rural Montana. Every flight meant someone received medical care that might not have been available otherwise. There's something else, Sarah continued. The State Emergency Management Office wants to formalize our relationship. They're offering a contract to serve as the primary emergency air transport provider for disasters, search and rescue operations, and major incidents like the bus accident. What kind of contract are we talking about? Minimum retainer of $15,000 monthly, plus flight fees and equipment costs for actual activations. They estimate we'd be called out 6 to 10 times per year for major incidents. Michael nodded slowly. State contracts provided stable revenue and official recognition, but they also came with additional responsibilities and requirements. We need to maintain higher levels of readiness, additional equipment, specialized training. It's a significant commitment, but it's also exactly what we set out to do. Use aviation to save lives and serve communities that don't have other options. Their discussion was interrupted by the phone. Sarah answered, and found herself speaking with a reporter from the Great Falls Tribune who wanted to do a feature story about their operation. "We're particularly interested in the background of your chief pilot," the reporter said. "Captain Rodriguez's military service and how he's applying those skills in civilian medical transport." After the call, Michael was thoughtful. "Media attention is good for business, but I don't want this to become about me personally. It's about the service we're providing to rural communities. Michael, people need to know that quality medical transport is available in rural Montana. Your story, from military service to saving civilian lives, helps build confidence in what we're doing. As long as the focus stays on the mission, not the messenger." The feature article ran the following week, complete with photos of their aircraft and interviews with medical personnel who had worked with their service. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 57 new inquiries in 2 days, Sarah reported. Medical facilities, emergency managers, even some ranchers asking about livestock transport services. "We definitely need to expand. Can't serve this demand with our current resources." Captain Lisa Chin arrived for her interview the following Monday. She was a compact, efficient woman in her early 40s who moved with the precise confidence of a military aviator. Her logbook showed over 4,000 hours of flight time, including extensive medical evacuation experience in Iraq and Afghanistan. "I've been following your operation since the bus accident story," she told them. "This is exactly the kind of flying I want to do in civilian life. Using aviation skills to save lives, serving communities that need help. It's not glamorous work," Michael warned. "Long hours, challenging weather, emergency callouts at all hours of the night." Lisa smiled. "Sounds like military medical evacuation, except the patients are civilians instead of soldiers. I can handle that." Sarah reviewed Lisa's qualifications and certifications: commercial license, instrument rating, multi-engine certification, instructor privileges, and extensive experience with medical transport operations. "When could you start?" Sarah asked. 2 weeks. "I'm finishing out processing from the Air Force and relocating my family to Montana. My husband is a paramedic, actually, so he understands the emergency services world." "Perfect. We'll need someone with medical background as we expand our operations." By the end of February, Mountain View Flight Services had grown from a struggling 2-person operation to a legitimate medical transport company. 3 aircraft, 3 pilots, contracts with medical facilities across northern Montana, and official recognition as the state's primary emergency air transport provider. "Remember when our biggest worry was making the next loan payment?" Sarah asked during a quiet moment in the office. Michael looked around at the expanded operations center with its multiple radio stations, computer terminals for flight planning, and detailed maps of medical facilities across the region. "Sometimes I wonder if we're growing too fast, taking on more than we can handle safely. The demand is real, Michael. These communities have needed this service for decades. We're not creating artificial demand. We're finally meeting needs that have always existed." "I know. It's just, in the military, expansion meant more resources, more support, bigger budgets. Here, it means more responsibility, more risk, more people depending on us. And more lives saved, more families that don't lose loved ones to distance and weather. More children like Maria Blackhorse who get the medical care they need in time." Michael nodded, understanding that their rapid growth was driven by genuine need rather than ambitious expansion. Every new contract represented communities that had been underserved, patients who had faced impossible choices between expensive air transport and dangerous ground travel. "All right," he said finally, "let's buy that King Air and hire those other 2 pilots. If we're going to do this, let's do it right." As winter began giving way to spring in Montana, the transformation of Mountain View Flight Services was complete. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a failing business had become a vital regional resource that served communities across one of America's most challenging geographic regions. The Red Falcon had found his mission, and that mission was growing beyond anything he had initially imagined possible. The call that would test everything Michael and his team had built came on a warm September morning when Montana's early fall colors were painting the landscape in brilliant golds and reds. Sarah was reviewing flight schedules when the emergency radio crackled to life with an urgency none of them had heard before. All aircraft, this is Glacier National Park Emergency Dispatch. We have a major incident at Granite Park Chalet. Tour bus carrying senior citizens has gone off going to the Sun Road. Multiple casualties, remote location, limited ground access due to rock slide. Requesting immediate air support for mass casualty evacuation. Michael was in the hangar performing maintenance on the King Air when Sarah's voice echoed across the facility. Michael, Lisa, emergency activation. We're launching everything we've got. Within minutes, the entire Mountain View team was mobilizing for their largest operation ever. 3 aircraft, 3 pilots, 2 paramedics, and all the medical equipment were being prepared for deployment to one of the most challenging rescue locations in Montana. What's the situation? Michael asked as he reviewed emergency protocols. Sarah had the park ranger on radio. Charter bus with 43 passengers, mostly senior citizens from a retirement community in Minneapolis. Bus went off the road near Granite Park Chalet, rolled down a steep embankment. At least 15 serious injuries, unknown number of fatalities. Ground rescue teams can't reach the site due to rock slide blocking the road. Landing zones. This from Captain Lisa Chun, who is pre-flighting the Beechcraft Bonanza. Granite Park has a small landing area, but it's at 8,000 feet elevation and surrounded by peaks. Weather is clear now, but afternoon thunderstorms are forecast. We'll have maybe 4 hours of good flying conditions. Michael studied the sectional chart of Glacier National Park, noting the challenging terrain and high elevation of the landing zone. Granite Park Chalet was accessible only by hiking trail or helicopter, perched on a remote alpine meadow with spectacular views and deadly approaches. Lisa, take the Bonanza with paramedic escort. You'll handle the most critical patients first. I'll follow in the King Air for multiple patient transport. Sarah, coordinate from here and prep the Cessna as backup. Where are we taking patients? Lisa asked, calculating flight times and fuel requirements. Kalispell Regional Medical Center has trauma capability and they're closest. Great Falls and Billings are options for overflow, but Kalispell should handle most cases. The flight to Granite Park took 40 minutes through increasingly turbulent air as morning heating created thermal activity in the mountains. Michael flew the King Air while Lisa followed in the Bonanza, both aircraft loaded with medical equipment and emergency supplies. Granite Park Chalet, this is Mountain View Medical Flight. We're approaching your location with 2 aircraft for patient evacuation. Mountain View Medical, this is Park Ranger Jim Watson. We have triage area established at the landing zone. 15 priority 1 patients requiring immediate transport, 12 priority 2 patients with serious but stable injuries, and 16 walking wounded. We also have, his voice broke slightly. We also have 8 fatalities. Michael felt the familiar weight of combat responsibility settling over him. Mass casualty operations required precise coordination, split-second decision-making, and the emotional strength to focus on saving lives while surrounded by tragedy. Roger, Granite Park. We're beginning approach to your location now. Landing at Granite Park required all of Michael's mountain flying experience. The landing area was a small alpine meadow at 8,000 feet elevation, surrounded by towering peaks and accessible only through a narrow canyon approach. Density altitude reduced engine performance significantly, requiring careful power management and precise speed control. The scene at the crash site was controlled chaos. Park rangers, volunteer firefighters, and medical personnel from across the region had somehow reached the remote location and established a professional triage operation. The tour bus lay crumpled at the bottom of a steep embankment, its bright paint stark against the alpine wilderness. Dr. Sarah Runninghorse, Indian Health Service, introduced the physician coordinating medical operations. I was leading a training exercise nearby when the call came in. We've got the most critical patient stabilized and ready for transport. Michael surveyed the organized operation with professional approval. Despite the remote location and challenging circumstances, the medical team had established proper triage protocols and patient care areas. What's the patient priority sequence? He asked. First load should be an 84-year-old male with crushing chest injuries, probable cardiac involvement. 79-year-old female with head trauma and declining consciousness. 68-year-old male with suspected internal bleeding. All three need immediate surgery. Lisa was already coordinating the loading of her first patients into the Bonanza. Her military medical evacuation experience showed as she efficiently managed patient care, equipment, and flight safety simultaneously. Michael, I can take 2 patients plus medical escort this trip, she reported. Flight time to Kalispell is 35 minutes. I'll be back in 90 minutes for the next load. Roger. I'll load 4 patients in the King Air and follow you out. The evacuation proceeded with military precision despite the challenging conditions. Michael's King Air, with its larger cabin and pressurization capability, could carry 4 patients plus medical escorts on each flight. Lisa's Bonanza handled the most critical cases requiring immediate surgery. On the second round of flights, weather conditions began deteriorating as afternoon thunderstorms developed over the Continental Divide. Dark clouds built rapidly, and turbulence increased significantly. Mountain View Aircraft, this is Kalispell Regional Emergency. We're receiving reports of severe weather moving into your operating area. What's your current status? Michael was loading patients for his 3rd trip when the call came. Kalispell, Mountain View Lead. We still have 6 Priority 1 patients and 8 Priority 2 patients requiring transport. Weather is marginal but flyable. Be advised, National Weather Service has issued severe thunderstorm warnings for Glacier National Park area. Winds gusting to 60 knots, heavy rain, possible hail. Michael looked at the western sky, where towering cumulonimbus clouds were building rapidly. Lightning flickered in the distance, and the wind was already picking up at their location. Doctor, he called to Dr. Running Horse. How critical are the remaining patients? Can any of them survive overnight at this elevation if we have to suspend operations? She reviewed her patient list grimly. 3 of the Priority 1s absolutely need surgery tonight. The others could probably survive until morning with proper care, but we don't have the equipment or personnel to maintain them at this elevation in severe weather. Lisa's voice crackled over the radio from her approach to Kalispell. Michael, I'm seeing some nasty weather building from the west. What's your decision on the remaining flights? Michael had faced similar decisions in combat, whether to continue dangerous operations or withdraw and leave people behind. The difference here was that these were elderly civilian tourists, not soldiers who had signed up for risk. We continue until we can't, he decided. Safety first, but we're not abandoning anyone unless absolutely necessary. The 4th evacuation flight departed just as the first raindrops began falling at Granite Park. Michael pushed the King Air's performance envelope, climbing rapidly to get above the building weather while maintaining safe patient care conditions. Halfway to Kalispell, they encountered severe turbulence that threatened to injure the already hurt passengers. Michael reduced power and descended to find smoother air, accepting longer flight time to maintain patient safety. How are they doing back there? He called to the medical escort. Holding steady, but this turbulence isn't helping. The chest trauma patient is showing irregular heart rhythm. We'll be on the ground in 15 minutes. The approach to Kalispell was challenging, but manageable with strong gusty winds and heavy rain reducing visibility. Michael used every bit of his instrument flying experience to maintain precise control while protecting his patients from excessive maneuvering. After landing and transferring patients, he faced a critical decision. 2 more flights were needed to evacuate the remaining patients, but weather conditions were deteriorating rapidly. Lightning was now visible throughout the area, and sustained winds were approaching the limits for safe mountain flying. Lisa, what's your assessment? He asked as she prepared for her final flight. Marginal, but doable if we go right now. Another 30 minutes, and we'll be grounded until the storm passes. That means the remaining patients spend the night on a mountain at 8,000 feet in a severe thunderstorm. The decision was made easier by Dr. Running Horse's radio call from Granite Park. Mountain View Medical, we absolutely must evacuate the remaining 3 critical patients tonight. I don't think they'll survive until morning, especially in this weather. Michael and Lisa launched their final flights into conditions that tested every aspect of their training and experience. Heavy rain, severe turbulence, lightning nearby, and gusty winds that made both takeoff and landing extremely challenging. This is like flying into Baghdad during a sandstorm. Lisa commented over the radio as they navigated through the storm. Except the people shooting at us are Mother Nature and gravity, Michael replied. Both aircraft completed their final evacuation successfully, landing at Kalispell just as conditions became completely unflyable. The last 3 patients were rushed into surgery, joining the others who had been evacuated throughout the day. Final count, Dr. Running Horse reported later that evening. 43 passengers and driver on the bus. 8 fatalities at the scene, 36 patients evacuated by air. All surviving patients are expected to recover, though several will require extended rehabilitation. Michael and Lisa sat in the Kalispell Hospital cafeteria, exhausted but satisfied. They had completed 11 medical evacuation flights in 8 hours, transported 36 patients from a remote mountain location, and operated in weather conditions that had grounded all other aircraft in the region. "Think we saved some lives today?" Lisa asked. Dr. Running Horse says at least 12 patients wouldn't have survived overnight at that elevation. "So yeah, I'd say we made a difference." Sarah arrived from Mountain View with clean clothes and hot coffee. "The governor called," she announced. "Wants to personally thank our team for the rescue operation. Says it's the most successful mass casualty evacuation in Montana history." "More importantly," Michael said, "how are our aircraft? Any maintenance issues from the hard flying today?" Lisa's Bonanza needs inspection of the landing gear after that rough touchdown in the wind. "Your King Air performed flawlessly. No squawks, no problems. The Cessna is ready for backup if needed." Over the following weeks, the story of the Granite Park Chalet rescue spread far beyond Montana. Aviation magazines featured articles about the small company that had accomplished what military units would consider a challenging operation. Medical journals discussed the coordination and protocols that had enabled successful evacuation of dozens of patients from an extremely remote location. "We've had inquiries from emergency management offices in Idaho, Wyoming, and North Dakota," Sarah reported during their monthly business meeting. "They want to know if we'd be interested in mutual aid agreements for major incidents." "That's a significant expansion of our mission," Michael observed. "Multi-state operations, different regulations, unfamiliar terrain. But it's also recognition that we've built something unique. There aren't many air medical services capable of operating in remote mountain areas under challenging conditions." Captain Chun had an interesting perspective. "In the military, successful units get assigned more challenging missions. Sounds like the civilian world works the same way." The business impact of the Granite Park rescue was immediate and substantial. Within a month, Mountain View Flight Services had received contract from emergency management agencies across the northern Rocky Mountain region. Medical facilities that had never heard of them were requesting transport services. Insurance companies were recognizing them as a preferred provider for difficult evacuations. "Our monthly revenue is now over $200,000, Sarah announced. "Net profit after all expenses is about $70,000. We're officially a successful aviation business. More importantly," Michael added, "we're saving lives on a regular basis. That bus evacuation alone probably saved a dozen lives. Add in all our other flights this year. 147 medical evacuation flights," Lisa read from their operations log. "Average response time, 36 minutes from emergency call to aircraft airborne. 98% success rate for critical patient outcomes." The numbers were impressive, but Michael was more interested in the stories behind them. The rancher's daughter who survived a riding accident because they could get her to trauma surgery in time. The elderly man who had a heart attack at a remote cabin and lived because they could transport him with cardiac care equipment. The pregnant woman whose complicated delivery required specialists available only in Billings. "You know what's really changed?" Sarah observed during a quiet moment. "Rural Montana isn't isolated anymore. People living in small towns and remote areas have access to the same level of emergency medical care as people in big cities. That's never been true before." Michael nodded, understanding that they had accomplished something beyond building a successful business. They had fundamentally changed the equation for medical emergencies across a vast geographic area. "The Red Falcon thing has taken on a life of its own," he noted wryly. "I got a call from a reporter who wants to do a documentary about military pilots transitioning to civilian emergency services. You comfortable with that level of attention?" as long as it helps people understand that quality medical aviation services are available in rural areas. The story isn't really about me. It's about proving that small operations can provide big capabilities when they're properly organized and equipped. On a clear October evening, as Michael conducted his final flight of the day, a routine medical transport from Havre to Great Falls, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 18 months ago, he had been a disgraced military officer wondering what to do with his life. Now he was the chief pilot of a medical transport service that covered thousands of square miles and served hundreds of thousands of people. The radio crackled with the familiar voice of Great Falls Approach Control, clearing him for landing. Below, the lights of the city spread across the Montana prairie, while above, stars were becoming visible in the darkening sky. Great Falls Regional. This is Mountain View Medical with one patient transport, he reported. Roger, Mountain View Medical. Clear to land runway 30. Medical crew is standing by. As the King Air settled onto the runway, Michael realized that he had found something he didn't know he was looking for, a mission that combined his aviation skills with genuine service to communities that needed help. The Red Falcon had landed, not at the end of a military career, but at the beginning of something even more meaningful. Behind him, his patient, an elderly farmer who had suffered a stroke at his remote homestead, was receiving excellent medical care that would allow him to recover and return to his family. Across Montana, dozens of similar stories played out every month because a small aviation company had proven that distance and geography didn't have to be barriers to quality emergency medical care. The transformation was complete. Mountain View Flight Services had grown from a failing flight school to the premier medical aviation service in the northern Rocky Mountains. More importantly, Red Falcon had grown from a bitter former military pilot to the leader of an organization that saved lives as a matter of routine business. As Michael shut down the aircraft and helped transfer his patient to the waiting medical team, he smiled at the irony. His greatest military missions had involved taking lives in service of his country. His greatest civilian mission involved saving lives in service of his community. Both had required courage, skill, and dedication. But only one had given him the deep satisfaction that comes from building something lasting and meaningful with his own hands.